For thousands of years, the civilization of ancient Egypt remained buried beneath layers of sand, myth, and mystery. The Great Pyramids stood as silent guardians in the desert, their true purpose and the identity of their builders lost to time. But all of that began to change in July 1799. During Napoleon Bonaparte's expedition to Egypt, a French soldier stumbled upon a large, carved stone near the town of Rosetta, about 35 miles east of Alexandria. This stone, later named the Rosetta Stone, bore inscriptions in 3 scripts: Egyptian hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Ancient Greek. It became the crucial key that would eventually allow scholars to decode the long-dead Egyptian language. This discovery was the gateway to understanding one of the most powerful, artistic, and spiritually rich civilizations in human history. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus once described Egypt as the gift of the Nile, and he was right. Without the Nile River, with its seasonal floods and dependable flow through an otherwise inhospitable desert, there would have been no Egypt. The story of ancient Egypt begins not with kings or temples, but with nature, geography, water, and fertile soil. But it was the ingenuity, labor, and beliefs of its people that transformed this environment into the cradle of one of humanity's oldest and most iconic civilizations. The Nile River was the lifeline of ancient Egypt. For millennia, it served as the region's only consistent source of water, allowing agriculture to flourish and society to settle. As Herodotus said, Egypt is the gift of the Nile, and that statement was no exaggeration. Each year, heavy rains from the highlands of East Africa would cause the Nile to overflow. When the floodwaters receded, they left behind a rich layer of black silt, a natural fertilizer that turned desert into farmland. Geographically, the Nile divided Egypt into 2 distinct regions: Lower Egypt in the north, where the river spread into a wide delta; Upper Egypt in the south, where the river flowed through narrow valleys flanked by cliffs. This natural division gave rise to different cultures and political centers. Yet the Nile also connected them, becoming a shared artery of trade, travel, and belief. By the Paleolithic period, early Egyptians were already crafting tools, making pottery, and living off the river's bounty. In the Neolithic era, carbon dating reveals that corn was cultivated around 4,250 BCE near the Fayum region. Here, people began building reed huts, planting crops in the muddy floodplains, and storing grain in underground silos or baskets. These early communities learned to anticipate the river's floods. They organized labor to dig canals, build levees, and construct irrigation basins, not out of ambition, but necessity. With this stability came the foundation of society: organized farming, surplus food, and the rise of early governance. Over time, villages evolved into small kingdoms, each with its own customs, symbols, and rulers. But all of them owed their existence to the river that gave and took with equal force. Thus, long before the first pyramid was built, Egypt had already become one of the world's earliest and most resilient agricultural civilizations, shaped not by conquest, but by water, earth, and time. In the early chapters of Egypt's story, there were not one, but 2 Egypts. To the north, Lower Egypt sprawled across the Nile Delta, open, fertile, and exposed to the Mediterranean. To the south, Upper Egypt ran along the narrow, river-bound valley, more isolated, mountainous, and culturally distinct. These two lands developed separately for centuries. Each had its own rulers, crowns, and animal symbols. But they were not destined to remain divided. Around 3000 BCE, a powerful ruler from Upper Egypt, believed by many to be King Narmer, united the two kingdoms, establishing Egypt's first dynasty and the foundation of pharaonic rule. Narmer is often identified with the legendary Menes, a name passed down in historical tradition. Archaeological evidence, including the famous Narmer palette, shows him wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbols of dual sovereignty. To represent this unity, the pharaohs adopted a new emblem, the shent, or double crown. From then on, Egypt's rulers would be known as the Lords of the Two Lands. But the unification was not just symbolic. It was political, consolidating power, standardizing religious practices, and aligning administrative systems. It was economic, merging trade routes, controlling the Nile from source to sea, and organizing labor on a massive scale. And it was ideological, elevating the pharaoh as both a political leader and a living deity, chosen by the gods to maintain Ma'at, the sacred balance of order and justice. This new centralized state enabled the rise of larger cities, monumental architecture, and nationwide governance. Though no written records survive from Egypt's pre-dynastic period, roughly 3150 BCE, archaeology has unearthed tools, pottery, and burial customs that show an evolving culture along the Nile. Early communities like Nakada, Thinis, and Nekhen became power centers during this transition. It is during this time that Egypt's cultural identity began to crystallize. Elaborate burials signaled beliefs in an afterlife. Distinctive pottery and art showed regional pride. The emergence of hierarchical leadership hinted at kingship to come. Narmer's unification of the two lands was the culmination of this slow process, a turning point that marked the birth of the Egyptian state as we know it. And with it, a new institution emerged, the pharaoh. Not just a king, but a bridge between heaven and earth. This was the dawn of dynastic Egypt, and the beginning of an empire that would span millennia. Following the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, the newly formed state began to take shape politically, culturally, and architecturally. Though the first dynasty laid the foundation, many of its origins can be traced back to the pre-dynastic settlements of Egypt. One of the earliest major centers was Nakada, a city that played a key role in the cultural evolution of Upper Egypt. Along with Thinis and Nekhen, it was one of three prominent city-states that competed for dominance during the late 4th millennium BCE. These cities were not just trade hubs, but also ritual and administrative centers with increasingly complex social structures. As Egypt entered its early dynastic period, circa 3150–2686 BCE, the country transitioned from small, independent communities into a centralized kingdom ruled by divine kingship. During this time, Egypt developed its first bureaucracy, standardized systems of measurement and record-keeping, elaborate burial practices, a formalized hierarchy of power. One of the most notable kings from the first dynasty was King Den, who ruled around 2990 BCE and was revered for his military successes, economic stability, and long reign of about 50 years. Den was the first pharaoh to be depicted wearing the double crown, visually affirming his sovereignty over both Upper and Lower Egypt. His rule marked a period of growing statecraft, with evidence of organized tax systems, royal decrees, and ceremonial architecture. Archaeological remains from his tomb at Abydos include intricate ivory and wood labels documenting trade and ritual, early examples of hieroglyphic inscriptions, monumental construction techniques for royal burial chambers. King Den's legacy included laying the groundwork for the pharaonic cult, emphasizing the king as a divine figure who maintained order, honored the gods, and protected the people. Meanwhile, common Egyptians continued to develop the skills that would become hallmarks of Egyptian society, crafting pottery and tools, building homes from mud brick, cultivating crops using irrigation basins fed by the Nile's annual flood, raising livestock such as cattle, sheep, and goats. This era was also marked by early state religion, often centered around local deities and nature-based cosmology, especially the importance of the sun, fertility, and the afterlife. By the end of the early dynastic period, Egypt had transformed from a land of scattered tribes into a fully functioning kingdom, ready to enter a new phase of ambition and scale. What would come next would reshape not just Egypt, but the entire ancient world. With the rise of the Third Dynasty around 2686 BCE, Egypt entered the Old Kingdom, a golden age of centralized authority, economic stability, and monumental ambition. It was during this era that Egypt's most iconic structures would be conceived. The pyramids. It began with King Djoser, the founder of the Third Dynasty. His reign marked a significant turning point in royal burial architecture. Under the guidance of his brilliant vizier and architect, Imhotep, Djoser commissioned the first pyramid in Egyptian history, the Step Pyramid of Saqqara. Unlike the simple mastabas, flat-roofed tombs of earlier rulers, Djoser's step pyramid rose in 6 massive tiers, symbolizing the pharaoh's journey to the heavens. Beneath the structure, a complex maze of tunnels and chambers was constructed, intended to protect the king's remains and possessions. Despite these precautions, grave robbers eventually plundered the tomb. Only the king's foot was discovered in modern excavations. Yet the significance of the step pyramid endured. It was the blueprint for every pyramid that followed. Djoser's successors in the Fourth Dynasty refined pyramid building further, most notably King Sneferu, who experimented with design at Meidum and Dashur. At Meidum, structural flaws caused the pyramid to partially collapse, earning it the nickname the False Pyramid. At Dashur, Sneferu built the Bent Pyramid, which changes angle halfway up, and then the Red Pyramid, Egypt's first true smooth-sided pyramid. But the pinnacle of pyramid construction came under Sneferu's son, Khufu, also known by his Greek name, Cheops. Around 2560 BCE, Khufu commissioned the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest and most precise stone structure ever built in the ancient world. Over 2 million limestone blocks were used, each weighing several tons, aligned with near-perfect accuracy to the cardinal directions. How it was constructed remains one of history's great engineering mysteries. While later legends claimed it was built by slaves, modern archaeology shows that well-fed, Specialized laborers built the pyramids, organized into crews, housed in nearby villages, and even compensated with rations of bread and beer. Khufu's successors continued this legacy. His son, Djedefre, possibly commissioned the Great Sphinx, though some credit Khafre, another of Khufu's sons. Khafre built the second pyramid at Giza, and Menkaure, Khafre's successor, constructed the third and smallest. The Giza Plateau became a sprawling necropolis, not only housing royal tombs, but also temples, shrines, priests' quarters, and workers' accommodations. It was a city of the dead, maintained by the living, devoted to eternity. By now, pyramid building was no longer just about burial. It was propaganda, a testament to the pharaoh's divine power. It was theology, anchoring beliefs about the afterlife. And it was politics, requiring national coordination of labor, materials, and faith. These pyramids were not just tombs, they were statements carved in stone, meant to defy time itself. In ancient Egypt, faith was not just belief, it was law, science, and daily life. From the earliest dynasties, religion guided every aspect of Egyptian society. It was central to governance, architecture, art, agriculture, and above all, to how Egyptians understood death. They believed in a complex afterlife, where the soul would journey through trials and judgment before being granted rebirth. This idea wasn't reserved only for kings. Over time, it extended to common citizens, though the privileges of the afterlife remained heavily influenced by wealth and status. The most powerful and enduring figure in the Egyptian pantheon was Osiris, god of the dead and the afterlife. According to myth, Osiris had once ruled as king of Egypt before being murdered by his brother, Set, and resurrected by his wife, Isis. As the ruler of the underworld, Osiris became the model for all dead pharaohs who were thought to join him after death. To reach the afterlife, a deceased person's body needed to be buried in Egypt, ideally in a properly consecrated tomb. Dying abroad was seen as a spiritual disaster, and families would go to great lengths, sometimes transporting corpses across deserts, to ensure the dead were buried on Egyptian soil. Funerary practices were elaborate and deeply ritualized. Bodies were mummified and buried with offerings. Tomb walls were covered in texts and spells. Sacred rituals were conducted to open the deceased's mouth, eyes, and heart in the next world. One of the most notable religious innovations of this period came during the reign of King Unas, the last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty. He was the first ruler to inscribe texts inside his tomb, what became known as the pyramid texts. These writings were spells and hymns meant to guide the king's soul through the afterlife and join the gods. While religion served to elevate the pharaohs, it also reinforced social divisions. Though all Egyptians could believe in life after death, only the wealthy elite could afford the tombs, rituals, and mummification necessary to prepare for it. Inequality extended even into eternity. Religious life was managed by a growing class of priests who oversaw temples, conducted ceremonies, and preserved theological knowledge. Over time, these priests gained increasing influence, so much so that by the end of the Old Kingdom, temple complexes were becoming wealthy and powerful institutions, sometimes rivaling the authority of the king himself. Another key aspect of religious life was daily offerings and temple rituals, often held in honor of the sun god Ra. Ra's cult grew especially strong during the 5th dynasty, as pharaohs emphasized their divine link to the sun, commissioning solar temples in addition to their pyramids. Even ordinary workers had spiritual lives. For example, at Giza, laborers were given 3 rations of beer per day, not just for hydration, but as a sacred offering, since beer was believed to be a gift from Osiris. Brewing was often overseen by priestesses and connected to the goddess Tienenjet. Marriage, too, reflected religious beliefs, though it was more secular than spiritual. There were no grand religious ceremonies. Unions were based on family agreements, property, and social ties, more than divine law. The Old Kingdom religion wasn't just about gods and temples. It was about ensuring cosmic balance, known as Ma'at, truth, justice, order. To break Ma'at was to invite chaos. To uphold it was to live in harmony with gods, nature, and fellow humans. This worldview shaped everything from government policy to funeral rites, and it would remain at the heart of Egyptian identity for over 2,000 years. Despite the glory of the Old Kingdom, Egypt's centralized power began to fracture by the end of the 6th dynasty. The reasons were complex. Weakened central authority, economic strain from massive pyramid construction, and the growing independence of local governors, known as nomarchs, who began to rule their regions almost like mini-kings. This collapse ushered in what historians call the First Intermediate Period, Simha 2181-2055 BCE, a time often described as chaotic, though recent evidence paints a more nuanced picture. Rather than total anarchy, Egypt became decentralized. Different cities and provinces functioned independently. While no massive pyramids were built, life continued. People farmed, traded, worshipped, and adapted. Still, the absence of a strong pharaoh meant no grand projects, no unified military, and no overarching religious cohesion. Tombs became modest, and regional styles emerged, reflecting the diversity of local traditions. Eventually, a new leader arose from the southern city of Thebes, Mentuhotep II, founder of the 11th dynasty. Through military campaigns and diplomatic maneuvering, he reunified Egypt, bringing the First Intermediate Period to an end. With that unification came the Middle Kingdom, ca. 2055, 1650 BCE, a renaissance in Egyptian art, administration, and infrastructure. Mentuhotep II's successors, like Mentuhotep III and Mentuhotep IV, continued expanding Egypt's borders and investing in national projects, including expeditions to Punt, a rich trading region on the Horn of Africa. The true architect of the Middle Kingdom's golden age, however, was Amenemhat I, a vizier under Mentuhotep IV who rose to power and founded the 12th dynasty. Amenemhat moved the capital to a new city near the Fayum region, strengthened irrigation systems, building canals and dikes to control Nile flooding, and reinforced Egypt's borders, particularly in the delta and southern Nubia. His son, Senusret I, ruled as co-regent, a common practice in the Middle Kingdom to ensure stable succession. This father-son model brought political continuity and allowed younger heirs to gain experience. The Middle Kingdom was marked by increased bureaucratic efficiency, expansion of agricultural lands, greater attention to commoner life, as seen in tomb art and literature, and a renewed sense of national identity, often invoking the glory of the Old Kingdom while refining its legacy. One of the most fascinating rulers was Sobekneferu, who reigned briefly at the end of the 12th dynasty, 1807–1802 BCE. She was the first confirmed female pharaoh in Egyptian history, and her rule marked both the end of a strong dynasty and the start of a period of gradual decline. Following her death without an heir, the 13th dynasty began, but it lacked the stability and vision of its predecessors. Egypt's government weakened, while in the south, the kingdom of Kush, centered at Kerma, began to grow into a powerful rival. The unity Egypt had fought to restore would once again be tested, this time not by chaos within, but by foreign powers beyond its borders. As the Middle Kingdom faded, Egypt entered another era of instability, the Second Intermediate Period, c. 1650–15 and 50 BCE. This time, the threat came not just from internal weakness, but from foreign invaders, a mysterious group known as the Hyksos. The Hyksos were likely from the Levant. They settled in the Nile Delta and gradually took control, establishing their own capital at Avaris and ruling as pharaohs. Though they adopted many Egyptian customs, they were still seen as outsiders, especially because they introduced new military technology, like the horse-drawn chariot, bronze weapons, and the composite bow. Meanwhile, native Egyptian rulers retreated to the south, based in Thebes. Among them was Sekenenretau, a southern king who resisted Hyksos rule. He was ultimately killed in battle, as his mummified skull shows multiple head wounds, likely from hand-to-hand combat. His son, Kamose, continued the fight, launching attacks northward, but it was Kamose's brother, Ahmose I, who finally drove the Hyksos out of Egypt, reclaiming Avaris, pursuing them into Canaan, and reuniting the kingdom once again. With that, victory began the new kingdom, c. 1070 BCE, Egypt's most powerful and expansive age. Ahmose and his successors transformed Egypt into a military empire. They expanded south into Nubia and east into modern-day Syria and Palestine. Among the rulers of this period, few are as remarkable as Hatshepsut. She began as regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III, but eventually declared herself pharaoh, the first woman to rule Egypt in her own right with full royal titles. Hatshepsut was a master of diplomacy, architecture, and propaganda. She built grand temples, especially her famous mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, and led a major expedition to Punt, bringing back exotic goods like incense trees, gold, and baboons. To legitimize her reign, she emphasized her divine birth and often appeared in statues and reliefs wearing male regalia, including the pharaoh's beard. Under Hatshepsut, Egypt enjoyed peace and prosperity. But after her death, her name was systematically erased from many monuments, possibly by Thutmose III, who later ruled as a military powerhouse, expanding Egypt to its greatest territorial reach. His campaigns reached as far as Kadesh, Syria, and even the borders of Mesopotamia. Through these triumphs, Egypt became not just a kingdom, but an empire, wealthier, stronger, and more culturally influential than ever before. Yet beneath the gold and glory, Egypt's future remained uncertain. Its borders were vast, but vulnerable. Its gods were mighty, but divided. And its rulers, even those who built like gods, would soon face forces even they could not control. As Egypt stood at the height of its imperial power, a spiritual earthquake was about to shake its very foundation. Not with weapons, but with ideas. The architect of this religious revolution was Akhenaten, a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. Early in his reign, he was known as Amenhotep IV, a traditional name linking him to the god Amun. But in the 5th year of his rule, he did the unthinkable. He renounced the old gods, abandoned Amun, and declared that Aten, the sun disk, was the only true god. He changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning servant of the Aten, and launched a sweeping religious reform that dismantled centuries of tradition. Temples to Amun and other gods were closed. Priests were stripped of power. Egypt's polytheistic worldview was replaced, briefly, by a form of monotheism. Akhenaten even built a new capital city, Akhenaten, modern-day Amarna, dedicated entirely to Aten. There, he and his queen, the iconic Nefertiti, ruled in near isolation, promoting a new artistic style, more fluid, intimate, and human, that broke from the rigid conventions of earlier dynasties. In these images, the royal family is shown embracing, playing with children, basking under the rays of Aten. It was deeply personal and politically radical. But not everyone welcomed this change. By elevating Aten above all, Akhenaten not only offended powerful religious institutions, but also disrupted Egypt's deeply held belief in Ma'at, the balance between divine forces. His reforms weakened Egypt's spiritual cohesion and alienated the priesthood, who had long served as the cultural and political backbone of the kingdom. When Akhenaten died, Egypt swiftly reversed course. His successor, possibly his son, was a boy king named Tutankhaten, who changed his name to Tutankhamun to honor the old god Amun. Under the guidance of advisors, he restored the temples, reopened the shrines, and moved the capital back to Thebes. Though Tutankhamun died young, his reign symbolized the end of the Aten experiment and the restoration of religious orthodoxy. Soon after, Seti I came to power, launching massive building projects to reaffirm traditional beliefs. His son, Ramses II, would become one of the most famous pharaohs in all of Egyptian history. Known as Ramses the Great, he ruled for 67 years, fought legendary battles like the one at Kadesh against the Hittites, and left behind colossal temples, including Abu Simbel, as symbols of divine authority. He depicted himself as a living god, warrior, and builder. Yet even Ramses II couldn't fully repair the fractures left by Akhenaten's revolution. In the decades that followed, Egypt began to face new threats. The mysterious sea peoples, waves of invaders from across the Mediterranean, launched devastating attacks on Egyptian ports and allies. Ramses III, a later pharaoh, would fight them off, but at a cost. The empire's economy weakened. Priests gained more power. The pharaoh's role diminished. Akhenaten's dream of unity through one god had failed. But his bold defiance of tradition left a legacy that echoed far beyond Egypt's deserts. He was a heretic to some, a visionary to others, and perhaps the first ruler in history to challenge an entire world order with faith alone. By the end of the New Kingdom, Egypt's golden age was over. The empire that had once stretched across the Near East was now fractured and fragile. Successors of Ramses II, from Merneptah to Ramses III, tried to maintain order, but the burden of constant warfare, foreign threats, and internal decay proved too great. The Sea Peoples struck again, this time destroying vital trading ports and weakening Egypt's connections to the outside world. Though Ramses III claimed victory over them, the battle left the economy drained and the central government deeply destabilized. In the centuries that followed, Egypt entered periods of fragmentation and foreign domination. Power shifted between rival dynasties, regional warlords, and priesthoods. By the Third Intermediate Period, Egypt was no longer a unified empire, but a land divided between competing kings and city-states. Some rulers, like Shoshenq I, tried to restore Egypt's strength. He reformed the priesthood and reasserted royal control over religious institutions. Others, like Psamtik I during the late period, brought temporary revival, stabilizing the economy, rebuilding monuments, and even establishing foreign alliances. But Egypt's enemies were no longer just raiders from the sea. In 525 BCE, the Persian Empire, under Cambyses II, invaded and conquered Egypt. Though Persian rulers respected Egyptian culture and presented themselves as pharaohs, their reign marked a shift. For the first time, Egypt was ruled from abroad. Egypt briefly regained independence under Amertaeus and the 28th dynasty, and later under rulers like Nectanebo II. But these final gasps of sovereignty could not hold. By 332 BCE, Egypt fell to a new power, Alexander the Great. The Macedonian conqueror swept into Egypt and was welcomed as a liberator. He founded the city of Alexandria, which would become the center of Greek culture, science, and trade. After his death, the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of Greek pharaohs, ruled Egypt, blending Hellenistic and Egyptian traditions. The last ruler of that line was the legendary Cleopatra VII, who famously aligned herself with both Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony in a desperate bid to preserve Egypt's independence. But after her defeat by Octavian, later Augustus, Egypt was annexed by Rome in 30 BCE. The age of the pharaohs was over, but Egypt never truly vanished. Its monuments remained, the pyramids, the temples, the tombs, speaking across millennia. Its gods, writing system, and mythology inspired generations of scholars, mystics, and rulers. Its echoes shaped Greek philosophy, Roman religion, and even modern-day esotericism. Thanks to the Rosetta Stone, the voices of ancient Egyptians speak again, not in myth, but in memory. Because Egypt didn't just build for its own time, it built for eternity.